We're filming in San Diego for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive, and I am honored to have Mr. Ray Conniff with me, trombonist and arranger and composer. And I want to tell you that when I grew up in the 50s, I lived outside Rochester, New York, and it was kind of a typical suburban home. And in my house, my parents played Glenn Miller and a little Basie and a lot of Ray Conniff. So it's a real pleasure for me to be talking with you today because your sound is something that was present a lot as I grew up. And I think probably it's a pretty huge compliment to have people refer to a sound, you know, like, well, what we need is that Ray Conniff sound, or, you know, and it's been a long road, but would you do it all again? Yeah.
Oh, sure. You know, as we live life, at the time when we're doing, like now, what we're doing, we think we're doing the right thing for now. And I guess if you went back and looked at every now, you thought you were doing, I can see times when I probably could have done something a little differently, but I think on the whole, yeah, I've been very fortunate. Well, main thing I guess I've been fortunate about is that there aren't a lot of men probably that go through a lifetime and do what they really love to do, you know, and I have had that happen to me in this life, and I'm very grateful for that. Yeah. You mentioned the 50s and your family and playing Ray Conniff, and I was born in Attleboro, Massachusetts in 1916, and I would say I was exposed to music, you know, with my mom and dad as a child, 5 and 6. I have recollections of 5 and 6, you know, musical recollections. And so what are we talking about? From the well, 56 I did my first album for Columbia Records. So we're talking about 40 years right in the middle of the whole thing when you started hearing it. People thought in 1956 when my first album came out, like they think about everybody that becomes popular, wow, overnight guy here, well, where's he been, you know? But there, as you think about it, there have been 40 years of exposure to music, and my dad played piano and a little piano. He used to play mostly chink chords, sing me little humorous songs, you know, and that tickled the heck out of me. But those little chink chords instilled a rhythm into me, made me very conscious of rhythm. And then he also played trombone. When I got a little older, he taught me to play the trombone when I was about 9. And my mom played piano and used to sing songs to me. So I was exposed to music. I'm 81 now. So I was exposed to music 40 years, about 40 years when you first heard about me.
Yeah. The songs that they were playing for you, they were probably considered popular music of that day. Were they mostly vocal songs that, you know, they had that you would sing along to?
You know, there's that's a very interesting question, because as I think about it, the music that I used to hear them play and sing, I can remember there was one thing that my mother would play. She would sing like a little soprano lead, and my dad would sing like a little obligato tenor part, and I can't remember what the piece was, but it was some semi-classical piece, and they used to do that sort of thing. But then, you know, sometimes people will come up to me, like now, this time, period of time that we're doing this interview, I'll do an interview, and someone will say, like, don't you think some of the music today is really dumb, you know? And and I remember one night they came home. They used to have minstrel shows in those days, and one night they came home from a minstrel show, and my dad was singing, "Yes, we have no bananas, we have no bananas today," you know. And I mean, how dumb can a song be, you know? And so it's always been that way. There's been great music, and then there's been very light, frivolous music, you know, and then there'd been junk, like, you know, that isn't even music, like rap. Is that music, you know? It's a rhythm with some a story, you know,
Yeah.
and rhymes and stuff. So music hasn't changed a lot from what I used to be exposed to.
I think you said a very important thing when you talked about how the boom chick of your father playing instilled that rhythm in you, because you can hear that in your arrangements. And do you think that's one of the keys to what's made your arranging so successful?
Well, you know, you ask very good questions, by the way. Up to that point that you're talking about, where you started hearing my music, I wasn't, before that, prior to that, like when I went through the, quote, big band era, where I played with the bands, like the first big band I played with was Bunny Berrigan in 1938. Played trombone and arranged music as well for the band. Pardon me. Then I did the same thing with the Bob Crosby Band in 1939. And then I went with the Artie Shaw Band in 1940. And down from 40 through 45, I think I played with 3 different Artie Shaw bands and wrote arrangements and played trombone, besides such greats as Jack Jenny and Vernon Brown were in the band. And, but anyway, during that era, and then I wrote for the Harry James Band in 1946. That whole period, and up to where you pointed out, where the first album on my own came out, I wrote with a different objective in mind. To me, it was fun, and it was a big kick if I wrote a chart, as we called them, and after I brought it into the band and they rehearsed it, Jack Jenny or Georgie Hall in the Bunny Berrigan Band, or Joe Bushkin in the Bunny Berrigan Band, or Buddy Rich was in the Bunny Berrigan first band I was in. They said, "Hey, that was a great arrangement, Ray. I like that thing you did on Little Gate." I said, "Oh, Little Gate was the band boys." You know, we never thought, who's going to know who Little Gate is? You know,
Right.
We didn't think commercially. I just thought, I wonder how the guys are going to like. I wrote for the guys. I wrote for Bunny. I wrote for the guys. I wrote for Bob Crosby and the guys in the band. I wrote for Artie Shaw and the guys in the band.
Yeah.
I never thought about the people out there that were paying our bills, you know, that were paying our salaries, that went to the dances, that listened to us on the air, that bought our records. You know, I didn't care about. I never gave them a second thought. I went through a period I call the lean years. And that was, gee, I can't pin it down. I know I'd been writing for the Harry James Band, around 46. I remember the first thing I did for Harry, I still have my soldier suit on. I wrote a thing called Easy, an original. And Harry and I had a parting of the ways because a few years down the road, I was doing an awful lot of writing for Harry, wrote a lot of originals for him. And I remember I went into, he had a song for me to do. I remember the song was Ruby. And he said, "By the way, why don't you write a little bit kind of a bop treatment on this?" Bop was kind of a new school of music was coming along, and I never did dig bop. I'd like to listen to it, and I think we had some great players like Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker, but it was not my bag, you know?
Yeah.
I'd like to hear the rhythm, you know, the driving 4/4, as Zeke Zarchi always called it, the driving 4/4 of the Northern American Negro.
Yeah.
And I always like to hear that, like Buddy Rich played that kind of drums, you know. And let's see if I can think of any. I can't think of any drummers. Who was the great drummer that was the Shaw Band? One of the first bands I was with, Davy Tough, you know.
Yeah.
That's the way I like to hear the drums. And bop was kind of supposed to be a floating type of rhythm on top cymbals and stuff. And you
Right.
weren't supposed to hear it, you were supposed to feel it here. You were supposed to feel what he was trying. And I don't know, I never felt that. So I said, "Hey, you know, Harry, I just don't feel that kind of music." and, you know, maybe it's time you got another boy. And his jaw dropped. He looked at me, he said, he couldn't believe what I was saying. And he said, well, okay. So I left the band. For 2 years, I thought all I had to do was pick up the phone, call by all accounts, you know, like Sonny Burkett, Decca, and Paul Weston was at Columbia Records, and I called on him and told him, hey, you know, I'm free now. I'm not writing steady all the time for Harry. I'm available. And boy, for 2 years, the phone hardly rang. And I finally, after waiting for the phone to ring for 2 years, I got so discouraged. I thought I had a wife and mother was supporting, and 3 children, and we were living out in Reseda, and I thought, I got to go get a job. I can't go on like this. I took a job. They were converting a 10-acre, it was a melon field into a subdivision out in Reseda. And I went out, took a job as a laborer, cleaning up the ditches behind the ditch digger. Where he'd make mistakes on the corner, I'd clean the ditches. And I got to thinking, wow, what happened? Which way did they go, you know? I was making, in 1940, Artie was paying me $300 a week, you know, which in those days was a lot of money. And here I am out digging ditches, you know, for $60 a week. So, but it gave me a lot of time to think. But anyway, I took an awful long, I got to start pinning my answers down. It took a long time to answer your question, but I started thinking completely different about writing arrangements. I thought, what if I started writing for the people that paid the bills, the people that listened, the people that bought the records, you know? And I started thinking more along the lines of commercially, and I thought about, you know, everything in life is rhythm. Our heartbeat is a rhythm. Each day is a rhythm. The sun rises and sets to a rhythm. The ocean tides go in and out to a rhythm. The cycles of the seasons are a rhythm. And I thought, rhythm is very important in our life. And I made the rhythm very predominant. And then I remembered when I first started thinking about the opposite sex. There was a little girl down the street that I had a terrible crush on. I must be, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, something like that. And she was always singing a song. It was, ooh, would you like to take a walk? Ooh, do you think it's going to rain? And something's going to come from that is the name of the song. And to this day, I've heard that song once in a while. People will play an old record or a disc jockey. It still moves something. I thought, if I can catch the songs that people fell in love to the first few times, I've got a wonderful idea. And that's what I did. I went back and I thought, at the period when I got my first chance to do an album, the 1956 wonderful album, which you heard, or something like it, it's wonderful, it's marvelous, it's awful nice, there were 3 of them. I picked songs, and by arithmetic, I went back the number of years when the age group I was trying to hit was 18 to 35 in the market. So I went back, when were those 18 to 35-year-olds hearing, ooh, would you like to take a walk with a little girl down the street, or the boy, you know? And so by arithmetic, I picked songs from the top 10 of those years, and that's what's wonderful, marvelous, awful night. That was, and so in other words, I didn't change my style of writing that much. I still wrote for brass and saxes, big band style with a predominant rhythm sound, and I added the voices quite accidentally. It was just an experiment on a single I originally was backing for Columbia Records. And Mitch Miller, who was head of all the artists at Columbia, came running out. He says, this is a great sound. We got to get you back in the studio, have you do a couple of sides, Ray Conniff, orchestra and chorus, and use that orchestra and chorus sound. And so the first thing we did was a single. It was called, on one side was Begin to Begin, and I did some more research, found out the two songs that had sold the most records, had the most sheet music, and played most airplay, and it was Begin to Begin and Stardust. That was in 1956. And we put the single out, and it became like a turntable hit. It was played day and night by disc jockeys all over the United States. And as a matter of fact, well, no, it wasn't until the album. The single, oddly enough, wasn't selling very much with saturation airplay. And Columbia Records would have meetings in the marketing. What is this with this Conniff? We're not selling this single, and that's all you hear on the air. And a fellow by the name of Hal Cook in marketing come up with the answer. He says, you know, I think we're on the wrong track with Ray Conniff. He's not a single artist. He's an album artist. Get him back in the studio with 10 more songs and put out an album, and I think we'll have something. And so that's what we did. And one of the other 10 songs was Wonderful, which we decided to use for the title song. And I used that instruments and voices and instruments sound and the predominant rhythm sound and the idea about people falling in love to the songs. And then that album and the title song, That's Wonderful, that became a turntable hit. It was on a chart that Billboard magazine had for about, I don't know if it's not on any longer, but it was only 10 albums would appear on that chart, and the chart said albums most played by disc jockeys. And it was on that album, on that list of 10 for about 9 or 10 months. It would be on at 5, it would go to 7 or 8, it would go back, it would go to 2 or 3, it would go back to 9, I think, well, that's it. It would go back to 4, it would go back to 6. It stayed on there for 9 or 10 months with airplay. And, but it really didn't sell quite a bit until about 6 months. I mean, it was, you know, negligible, fairly good sale, but after 6 months, it was like your mom and dad or whoever were buying the records in those days thought, okay, somebody says, you can go buy it now if you want. They heard it so much. The airplay was wonderful. Finally, they started going in, and it became a gold record, and then we started following it up with a lot of others like it.
That's so interesting that, I mean, it was very astute of you to really have that time off and spend that time digging ditches, that really thinking about, now, what am I going to do now? And really think about what people wanted to hear and songs they fell in love with. And so that you were bringing the business and the music together. Or too often, sometimes the businessmen don't really know music at all. And you pulled them right together.
Yeah, they knew what I was doing, too. They liked the idea of what I was doing. And matter of fact, I went to a company called Motivational Institute of Motivational Research, and they got very much interested in the project, and without charging me, they did some research on my product, and then Columbia Records got them into it, and we did it further. But, you know, what was fun about it, though, was I didn't go all the way down the line and do like you know, Guy Lombardo commercial style, or I can't think of any of the real commercial bands of that time. But I was doing like a big band sound with voices, and I was using the guys that were playing all those things out on the road in the days when I was on the road. Like Billy Butterfield was playing lead trumpet, Lou McGarity was playing lead trombone, Panama Francis was in the rhythm section, Dick Hyman was playing piano. If I couldn't get Dick, I'd get Johnny Guarneri, you know, and the guys that played with Benny's band, Jaime Schertz and Toots Mandela were playing the alto saxophone. Georgie Hall was playing tenor. Jerry Jerome was playing tenor. You know, it was an all-star band playing written arrangements by a guy that used to write for the big bands, but was now writing big band style for the people, and the people dug it. They could understand it, you know, because they could hear the melody. Even when the guys would play solos, they'd kind of hang around the melody because they knew what I was trying to do, you know. I used to write the solos out, and they stayed pretty close to them, you know. And so it was fun to have hit records and be doing something we all enjoyed doing as well.
Right. Let me play something for you here.
Okay.
And talking about your arranging.
Would it be all right if I used one of these?
Sure.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's the original Artie Shaw, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, 1940 we recorded that, yeah.
So at this point, you were still writing for the guys in the band, but you still had that very predominant rhythm thing happening right up front.
Well, it's strange that you picked that particular recording out, because on that particular recording, you know, all through the years, working with the bands, and I really started playing, I guess you play professionally when you get paid for a gig. And the first time I got paid for a gig, it was in 1933, when I was in high school. And so all through the year, and I was writing at the same time. I must tell you sometime during the interview how I started writing.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
I got a little device called a lightning arranger. I paid $1 for a mail order device. I wrote my first arrangement with a $1 mail order device. But anyway, you write yourself, don't you? Yeah. Well, you probably, I don't know if you're anything like me. I think out of every 100 arrangements I probably write, there's one that I think really came off, either recording or the way I wrote or everything. And this was one, when I brought this in and heard this and heard it perform, I thought, this is one of the best things I've ever done for coming together, you know, for the whole routine, the whole thing. And I thought, if I ever get my own group, I'm going to re-record that again. I would say there were two that I did like that during my whole career with the big bands. The other one was Harry James' September song. That turned out great, too. And both those arrangements, you know, I always try to give it, as you probably do, all my best effort, you know, my best shot, and work a long time with it before I put any notes down. And but those two really turned out. So I did re-record both of those. So you picked one that, even though it was written with the old era of the guys in the band and Artie Shaw, the thought that went into it turned out, it was although it didn't use the formula, the hit formula idea, the way all the elements came together was, I would say, even though it's with a great jazz band, it's commercial. You know, people can understand it, can hear the melody, they can feel the rhythm, and
they were still dancing to that music at that time.
Yeah.
And it had that kind of, it was a touch of Latin beat in there too.
Yeah, I think I always had that. I remember one of the, usually people that do interviews ask me, what are the highlights that you think about, you know, in your whole life of music? And one of them, I mentioned that I was born in Attleboro, Massachusetts, and in our house there was a basement. My dad practically built a house with his own hand. There was a basement, first floor, which had a kitchen, front hall, living room and dining room. And then the second floor had the bedrooms and a bathroom. And then above, what we used to call the attic. And one day, and that was where you kept all the junk, you know, the extra stuff. One day I went up in the attic and I discovered a Victrola, we called it. It was an old Edison cylinder type Victrola. Wow. And there was some of the old records there. And I discovered my first initiation into music, really, except for what I told you about my mom and dad playing, was to hear the Poet and Peasant Overture. And that was a real charge to me. I couldn't believe things could be like that musically, you know, and I sat and must have listened to that thing for 2 hours. And then I started looking at some of the other things, and there was a lot of Latin stuff there. And I listened to a lot of Latin stuff, and I think I got a feel for Latin very early on from that. And that stuck with me.
And plus, your records now, over the years, have been very popular in those countries.
One period of time, after quite a few years with the label that I originally went with, I got a call from the Latin division, and they said they were getting a lot of calls from South American countries and wanted Ray Conniff to do an album of just Latin music. And so I did, my first Latin album was called Latino, something Latino. Siempre Latino, was that? I can't remember. But anyway, after that, it became very successful in South America, and I did quite a few after that, beamed right at the Latin countries only.
Do you think it helped also that your vocals were using, they weren't singing the lyrics so that there was no language thing there?
Oh,
some
yeah.
of those
You
records.
hit on something that I usually bring out in an interview when I talk about that first album. And they usually say, what do you think made your album successful? And I think that was one of the things. I didn't have any language barrier. And when Columbia Records sent samples out all over the world, that original wonderful album was picked up all over the world and became quite popular all over the world, as did a lot of the follow-up albums. And that was one of the things. Doing the great songs of like Cole Porter, George Gershwin, and Jerome Kern, and I had a vocal sound in there with the chorus. But usually when record companies of USA, which were very big, you know, would send samples out to other countries of singers singing these songs of Cole Porter and Gershwin and so forth, they would be in English, and there'd be a language barrier. And here Ray Conniff comes out with these great songs with no language barrier, but they still add the voice in there, and they liked that.
Yeah.
And so those records became popular all over the world. And you know, that, I think, together with the choice of the material was, and you know, the rhythm sound, the voices with instruments and no language barrier, and the idea of picking the hits that people would connect with when they first fell in love. I think that was kind of a three-point formula that made it successful all over the world and kept it successful.
Did you start to hear some imitators?
Oh
after that?
yeah, there were a lot of them. Matter of fact, I wasted about 2 years of my life trying to find a way to stop them from doing it.
Oh.
And I had attorneys and copyright attorneys and regular attorneys, and we did a lot of research. We found out, they found out that I couldn't, you can change, it's different now. You can copyright arrangements now. Well, you could in those days, but it was a very complicated thing I ran into. I finally found that the best thing for me to do was to forget about all the imitators and just keep going on ahead and move ahead and what came to me, and not worry about if someone else was imitating me. And I found out that they all fell by the wayside. It wasn't really there was only one that really survived, and he didn't survive by copying. There was a fellow in Europe that became quite popular, and he originally copied me when he started, but he eventually developed his own style and became James Last. He became quite well known in Europe.
It seems that the instrumental sound at that time, well, let me rephrase that. We don't hear as many instrumental hits anymore. You know, you had your music, and every once in a while something would come up like A Walk in the Black Forest by Horst Jankowski, I think his name was. And then, of course, the Tijuana Brass. And that it was still possible to have instrumental music be big sellers. I don't know where that fell by the wayside. I don't think we hear that much anymore. Just purely instrumental music.
Yeah.
Unless it's Kenny G, I guess he's an example.
Yeah. Last one I can really think of is
The Hustle.
that was a
yeah.
big hit.
Right.
What was his name? Can't think of his
The
name.
Hustle. Do the Hustle.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, like in the old days, the big bands had a lot of instrumental hits, In the Mood and String of Pearls and those kind of things. Yeah. But you know, I think probably, even in the old days, for every instrumental hit, weren't there 3 or 4 vocal hits, you know, with lyrics? I think instrumental hits have never been the big thing, but I don't think it's changed a lot, but it is true that I think in my own case, in the Latin countries, I've had a lot of instrumental hits. Like Besame Mucho is a tremendous, that my arrangement of that was a big hit in Latin America. Well, there was one, when we do tours down there, we conclude several songs as Besame Mucho. When I play that, they'll all start singing the arrangement. And Green Eyes was another one down there. Beyond the Sea was a big hit down there. Brazil was a big hit. Night and Day. There was an album I did down there. It was called A Touch of Latin, and it had all of those songs in it. And we almost have to include those when we do tours, or they'll ask for them from the audience. And so that would be the exception with me. I've had a lot of instrumental hits down there.
I want to go back to this music chord transposer.
Oh, it was called a Lightning Arranger. Yeah, that was about 1934. I was a junior in high school. No, I was a senior by then. And I was playing with this little band. We were playing stocks, you know. And we had trumpet, trombone. No, we never could get a good second trumpet. We usually had trumpet and trombone. Sometimes we had a bigger gig. We'd have 3 brass and 3 saxes and drums and piano, and we could never get a good bass player. And we'd play stocks, and but anyway, we played for the school dances, you know. And one day I was looking for something in my dad's room, and he was secretary of the Musicians Union in Attleboro, Massachusetts, played trombone in the marching band, you know, and took care of their business for them. And I was looking for something in his desk, and he subscribed to Billboard magazine, and I started thumbing through it. And down the lower right-hand corner, you can remember the right-hand page, was a little box about, I don't know, a couple inches, less than a couple inches high. It said, Lightning Arranger. I can't remember the wording, but learn to arrange overnight, you know, instantaneous arranging. What it was a transposing device, and when there's way I could, is it okay if I write them? Oh, I don't have a pencil. Yeah, I think I have some. It was we used to call it celluloid. Is it okay if I write on here?
Yeah, sure.
And now we call it plastic. But it was about, let me see, I'll get this up to the camera after, okay? Let's see, I'll give you an idea. It's because it's easy to understand if you see this. Okay. I won't go this whole bit. I'll show you how one of the wheels would look. Okay. Now, there were two plastic pieces, and, you know, I picture one of these and then another one. And in between, here was a wheel in here, see?
Yeah.
And there was a wheel in here, and you could turn the wheels here. Then there were slots. I didn't put all the slots in.
Right.
And you could turn it over, and there were more slots, see, on the back. So here would say, like, it would say concert instruments, like piano. It would give a C chord.
Yeah.
It'd have a C, a G, E, and a C chord.
Right.
Then here it would say B-flat trumpets, and it would say D, A, F sharp, D. Then here would say E-flat saxophones, which would be what? A, E, C sharp, A, you know. And so you had the C chord here, and if you wanted to write for what I played, trumpet, we had a trumpet, E-flat, and we had tenor saxophone,
right,
which also comes under the heading of the trumpets, you know, the B-flat trumpet. So I could write a C chord for those 4 instruments and know what notes to write for them. And so then over on this side here, well, on these slots over here, this would say C7.
Oh, okay, we got the dominant.
And this would be for C7. And then there would be down in here, there'd be slots that say ninths. Here would say diminished, augmented. Then you turn over, and you know, you'd have the whole ball of wax. So,
wow.
So I thought this was great. So I took the ninth thing, and I put it down, and I just happened to have it on F7, see? So I played the F7, no, I had it on F9. No, I had it on F7. So I played the F7, and I turned the wheel, and I just accidentally turned it in the direction of the cycle of the fifths. And the next slot was B-flat 7. So I struck the B-flat 7, you know, and held the thing down.
Yeah.
Turned it another notch, hit the E-flat 7. Wow, that's Sweet Georgia Brown, you know. And so I wrote my first arrangement, and I turned it over, and I did it instead of F7s, I did the ninth chords. and I did Sweet Georgia Brown for trumpet, trombone, and 3 saxes, and I used the 5-way, no double lead, you know,
Yeah.
and it was like Duke was writing in those
Right.
days, you know, and I brought that into the guys, and they fell on the floor, you know, boop, boop, boo, doo, boo, doo, boo, doo, boo, doo, boo, doo. And, you know, with just 5 ways, imagine what that sound, nobody had ever heard anything like that, you know, they weren't writing like that then.
That's a great story. How
So
long
for
did you hold
$1,
on- How long did you hold on to that thing?
Oh boy, do I wish I had that today. Yeah,
That'd
for
be-
$1, what an investment. And of course, I used it for a while as a transposing device, but that led me into writing. Of course,
Sure.
later on, I studied, and I studied with Hugo Friedhofer, by the way, for why he was great. Do you remember him? He wrote for the motion pictures out here in the West Coast. And then I ran into, who was it? Somebody tipped me off to start looking into the classics, you know, and I started taking Tchaikovsky scores. Did you ever do that? You take like
Yeah.
Romeo and Juliet and you put it everything down into concert so you can look at it quicker. And I
Try to figure out.
rescored it down into concert, and the simplicity of Tchaikovsky's writing was amazing when you saw it that way. And also, that's where I started learning, you know, the beauty of, I think that's one thing that's a little missing today. I heard a show, did you, by the way, see, what's a great fella, the interviewer, the top interview on CNN, what's his name?
Not Ted Koppel.
No.
CNN.
CNN. Larry King.
Oh,
he
yeah,
had
okay.
Eric Clapton on.
Oh.
And he was playing guitar, and I think, except from where I heard him and his writings with the guitar, mainly today, well, a point I want to make is, a lot of today's music is being written by guitar players. You can't, the guitar, you miss the beauty of a Tchaikovsky, like, du, du, bum, bum, du, 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 bum, bum, bum. You know, the third in the bass, the seventh in the bass, you know. With the guitar, you always have the tonic in the bass. And I think that's missing a little bit in the younger writers today. They write with the guitar. They need to study those classics and see the beauty, the great sound of a third in the bass, and not doubled in the harmony. You know,
Yeah.
leave the third out in the harmony. It's only down there. There's something about that. It just moves me. I don't know.
It's interesting you mention that, because if you look at, recently I was looking at some of the music from West Side Story, and One Hand, One Heart, and that's what Bernstein did. He had very simple chords, but he would put the third in the bass, or it changed the whole thing. Gave it a real beautiful effect.
Yeah. Well, if you took Tchaikovsky, play the melody and the bass line, you practically got a composition that's going like this, you know. But with today's writers, everything's going like this, you know. But there's something about that contrary motion, the movement of the bass. It's great. But I learned that from breaking those scores down, you know, that I thought, wow, what a sound, that's great. That's how they do that, huh? They put it, and I'd hunt, wait a minute now, have an F chord and there'd be an A in the bass, and I'd be looking, it must be, he's got guys way up, and they must have an A somewhere there. I look at it, no A.
No.
No A, it's only down in the bass, you know.
That's an important lesson too, in that I know that I've thought sometimes when I've been trying to orchestrate something, and I don't have enough notes, and, you know, gee, this guy's got nothing to play. And you're tempted, instead of giving him a rest, to give that person a note to play, but maybe it's not really necessary.
Oh, you know, that's a great lesson. I learned that from Hugo. I learned it. He taught me, but I don't use it all the time. He say, Ray, one of the things that if you can learn, the fewer guys you use to get the desired result, and the fewer notes you use to get the desired result that you're after, it's always going to sound better. And that's a hard one. If you got 60 guys there, you want everybody playing all the time. You know, especially the producer wants everybody playing all the time. We're paying them, aren't we? And sometimes you have only 1/3 of them or 1/10 of them playing, and then bring them in, and then let it come out, and then let it go back down to just a few guys, you know. That's like, we don't talk like this all the time, do we? We have nuances when we talk. We
Yes.
talk like this. We emphasize things,
Right.
or we de-emphasize things.
Wow.
And
Good lesson.
music has to be the
Yeah.
same way.
Let me ask you kind of a business question. As you became a well-known arranger and producer and so forth, were you able to get better business arrangements with your record company? Did you kind of hold more power in the structure of things?
Gee, I don't, as I became
Well,
better at what?
You must have had an arrangement like with Columbia. Did you get a percentage of the recording? Or were you on contract?
I started out like all the rest of the artists. When I first, the first break I got was through Mitch Miller. I met Mitch when I was writing for Harry James Band, and he would come out to the West Coast and sit in the booth and oversee the sessions. And when I first went back to New York, this is, let's say, 5 or 6 years later, after I had been arranging for Harry James, I went back to try it, to get back. I had been on the West Coast for a while, and I decided, gee, I was doing well, but I thought I could be doing better. It seemed like I'm not quite fulfilling what I could really do. And I came in as a trombonist on a record session, and Mitch was in the booth on the session. And he came out and said, "Hi, Ray, what you doing in New York?" And I said, "Well, I'm in town now, and, you know, we used to talk about my ideas that I was telling you about writing commercially for the people that when they fell in love, and the time period and the predominance of the rhythm." I said, "You know, if you need any arranging done, I'm here available now." And he says, "Fine, I'll keep you in mind," the old line, you know. "Don't call us, we'll call you."
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, the same old thing. But sure enough, 2 weeks later, he called me, and he got me into do backings for a girl called Eileen Rogers. And by the way, while I was out in California, during the lean years, I forgot to tell you about this. You know, I told you about the lean years?
Yeah.
I went out, and at the suggestion of Frank Duvall, I bought a book called The Grammar of Conducting. Did you ever see that book?
No.
You buy yourself a mirror and you put it up on the wall, and you get the music stand and you picture, you know, the full orchestra, all 60 of them, and you conduct Romeo and Juliet, and you cue everything, you know, and you do the whole thing, and you learn you don't conduct like this, you know. This is the hand you keep time with, this is the one you know.
Yeah.
And most guys that don't do it, they just lead like this all the time. But anyway, so I studied the grammar of conducting, and I practiced, started taking piano lessons, which I never did overcome. I never became accomplished on the keyboard. And I would practice the trombone, and I would write. And so anyway, so now it's coming together. So he called me in about an Eileen Rogers, Two Sides. And he said to me at the close of the interview, she was there, I got her key, you know. I can remember the two songs was "Now Is the Time" and "Just a Little Bit More." That's how vivid this whole thing is in my mind.
Yeah.
And he said, as I'm going out the door, he said, "By the way, if you want, why don't you write yourself a couple of trombone parts if you want to make yourself a couple extra bucks?"
Uh-huh.
And I'm going to tell, as I tell you this story, what I'm going to tell you now took place in about 10 seconds. It takes a long time to tell it, but it took place back and forth, a little exchange. The first exchange was, why don't you write yourself a couple of trombone parts if you want to make yourself a couple of extra bucks? And I says, well, who's conducting? And this, if you knew me in those days, I'm such an introvert. For me to ask a question like this, God must have been looking over me. I don't know how I ever asked that question. And he said, well, I've got to conduct. It was a split session. You know how they'd put 4 songs in on the side, and one artist would do 2 songs, and another would do 2 songs. Don Cherry was doing 2 songs, and Eileen Rogers, my artist, was doing 2 songs. So what he's telling me is, I've got a conductor hired. Norm Layton is going to be conducting. So for the Don Cherries, you know, it's a split session. And I asked the question, well, who's going to, and so this is the way it went. So he says, write yourself a couple of trombone parts. Well, who's going to conduct? And he stopped and said, why, would you like to conduct?
No.
And I said, well, yeah. And she said, okay. That's how long it took for me to become a conductor. A complete introvert that always would say, oh, okay, I won't, okay, you got a conductor, I'll bring the arrangements in and give them to him, you know.
Yeah.
So this is the first time up to now in my career, I'm bringing arrangements, giving them to Harry James. He's setting the tempos. I'm giving them to Artie Shaw. He's setting the tempos. He's telling him how, I'm not up in... So this is the first time I come in with 2 charts, and I set the tempos. I tell them how to play them. I go in the booth, tell them how to balance them. And so, anyway, Mitch was tickled to death. He thought, this is great. This guy is great. So he started giving me all his artists. I did Don Cherry's Band of Gold. You remember that a little later? Then I did Johnny Ray's Just Walking in the Rain. And by the way, Dick Hyman did the whistling on that. That had a little hook in it, the whistle. And I did Singing the Blues with the, you know, through the teeth whistle like Haggart does. I did the whistle on Singing the Blues. And I did the early Johnny Mathis's Chances Are It's Not For Me to Say with the piano hook, you know. And boodle-doo-doo-doo, it's not for me to say, boodle-doo-doo-doo, he'll love me, boodle-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo.
Sounds like whoever did I Left My Heart in San Francisco must have heard that recording.
Yeah, they copied it from that, yeah. And then, yeah, that was used again in that. And anyway, and then I did the Marty Robbins stuff, White Sport Coat. So, Mitch, you asked about the deal.
Yeah.
Mitch said, hey, you got a meeting, you know, say, hey, everything this Conniff guy is doing is getting on the charts, you know, and so that, so he was going out the West Coast, and he said, I won't be using you for a couple of weeks. I'm going out the West Coast, and I'm going to do Doris Day, Rosie Clooney, and Joe Stafford. And I said, oh. I said, why don't you take me with you? And he says, why, you want to go with me? And I said, yeah, I'd like to go with you. He said, I'll tell you what, you pay your own plane fare. I'll give you all 3 artists. You do 4 charts for each artist. That'd be 12 charts I do. And you get your arrangement. I was getting, I think, $150 an arrangement. And I said, good, you got a deal. So I went out with him, and we got out there, and it turned out one of the artists, I forget who it was I guess it was Joe Stafford, got what I've got today, kind of a laryngitis thing, couldn't sing. I lost her. Doris Day got into contractual dispute and decided not to record right then. So all I did was a Rosie Clooney, 4 sides. And she was great to work with. I thought she was terrific. When I walked in the studio, she said, you're Ray Conniff? I said, yeah. The arranger, I said, yeah. She said, you got to help me. And she grabbed a hold of me and hugged me. And her little body, which she was very small, and her little body was just shaking. She was so nervous. Wow. I said, Rosie, you're Rosie Clooney, aren't you? And she says, yeah. I says, you are great. What are you worried about? You're such a great... She is one of the greatest musicians I've ever worked with. When she sang a note, bing, it was right on the button. I mean, she didn't scoop up to the note. Yeah. She really hit them right in tune and stayed in tune, you know, on a great sound. So she was wonderful. So she relaxed and she sang great. But anyway, so we did the Rosie sessions, and you asked, I still didn't answer my question about the deal. So anyway, when we got back, Mitch says, I'm going to make it up to you when we get back to L.A., to New York. So that's what he did. He gave me that single that I told you about, Begin to Being Stardust. Oh, okay. That was the way he would wheel and deal, and which developed into the album. So when the album came along, I said, well, what's the deal, Mitch? And he said, oh, don't worry about the deal. You talk to me all the time. So they sent me contracts, and I signed contracts. You know, it's the stock contract is what they said. So I signed a contract with 3%.
3%?
3%. And not 3% of an album. It's 3% after you pay the cost of the jacket, you know.
Yeah.
You know, these things here, these were selling for what? $3.98 or something, back in those days. Yeah. But the thing inside here...
There's no record in there, but...
No, but the thing inside was worth like maybe $1 or so. That's what you got the 3% on, you know. So, but anyway. So
Oh,
this,
wait a minute now. I want to make sure I understand this.
okay.
You didn't get 3% of what they were actually selling it for. You got 3% of just the record. Just
The record itself. Oh, there were a lot of other little clauses. Like
Yeah.
they used to be made of what was it? Acetate. They used to break.
Yeah.
They had a 10% breakage clause in there.
Oh.
Do you know the breakage clause is still in all the contracts? There's nothing that can break anymore. Now they say it's because of stuff that comes back or something.
No.
But anyway, yeah, you got 3%. Oh, there were a lot of other things that cut it out. By the time I got all through, I think in those days I used to get 18 cents on an album in those days. Now it's up much more, and I have a better percentage. But anyway, to get back to your question about the deal, so after a while, I was doing everything, you know, Wonderful, Marvelous, Awful, Nice were out now. Let's say a little later down the road, and they're doing quite well on getting gold records. And I was in, you know, got to start knowing people around, and one day I ran into Mitch, and I said, "Hey, Mitch." He says, "Yeah, we used to have a lot of arguments, but we got along great." I says, "Hey, what's this contract these guys are giving me at Columbia?" He said, "Well, what do you mean? What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I'm getting a 3% royalty. Doris Day and can't think of any names. Give me some names in those days." Well, Sinatra, all of them, you know. I said, "They're getting 5%. What is 5? Oh, that's our top royalty. You're not getting the top royalty. Fine. Forget it. I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it." Next few days later, a new contract would come out. I never worried about what was in the contract. So it finally got up where I was what they called in those days a flat artist. In other words, I used to go in, they paid the cost of my musicians and singers, which is a big item, you know. Well, in those days, it wasn't that big. Now it is. It was like, talking numbers, an album, total album, musicians and singers. First albums I did, 1956, I would say maybe $15,000, $15,000.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not.
Now I can, musicians and singers, and I go in with a time schedule and a budget, you know. I know what I'm doing. I don't go in there and spend 4 days on the bass drum, you know, like some of the younger artists do, which is all right. They're selling more records than I am. I'm not knocking it, you know. But I would go in, I could do 4 tunes a session, and I had it all worked out. But now, even working on a tight budget, I'd say a good $100,000 at least for musicians and singers. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe you can get the cover in there too on this, the artwork on the CD. But that was, in those days, 10 or 12, 15, 13,000.
Right.
And, but anyway, they paid all of that, and I got the 3% above that. But anyway, they got me up then to what was called the top royalty, 5%, and later on, and that they had 2 different kinds of contracts. Some of the contracts were on wholesale, so we're getting too complicated. Some were on wholesale, some were on retail, but I had the best I could get at the time. Yeah, to answer, really, the quick answer to the question is, when you're selling product, you get a good deal. When you're not selling, it's tough to get the top deal.
Right.
You know?
3% of nothing isn't very good. if
Yeah,
you're
it
not
doesn't make
selling.
any difference. Yeah, right, yeah.
And I've noticed that at that time you had a time frame that you had to work in, or that you chose to work in for each song. That, as I look at these titles, the longest cut I see is like 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Was that mostly for a radio consideration, or was it just for the listener's attention span, or?
Well, there were 2 things that went into that. The radio was a very big part of it, airplay. If you had a song that was 3:15 and someone else had a song that was 2:15, and the guy's making up his show, he would pick the 2:15 unless he really wanted to play yours, because you could get more commercials in.
Oh.
You know, and we were all kind of keeping our cuts down as much as we could, because we got a better chance of airplay on the cuts if they were around 2:15, 2:20 was ideal.
Oh.
Yeah. To go under it, you were getting, you know, the buyer wasn't getting enough music, and
Yeah.
and you didn't really have a chance to get a good idea in the arrangement. The other thing was that on the album sides, long cuts, well, let's see, we were putting out 12 songs to a cut, or to an album originally, and 6 on a side, and they eventually cut that to 5 on the side because of the royalties and the payments to the song, for the songs, you know. Let's see, you asked about the timing.
So
There was another,
as you write your arrangement then, you had to actually figure out what's the tempo of this song and kind of time, like how many choruses can I do? Do I have to put should I go to the bridge here sooner than I was going? You know, you had to keep in mind the time as you put the structure of the song.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still have a watch. This is a secondhand, and like if I was here and I got a great idea and I said, do you mind if we stop the tape? And I can sing myself 8 bars and stop it and say, okay, let's go on, and I can go home and I can remember the song and what the tempo was by the 8 bars.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would time everything out and would shoot for around. I didn't make it a real rule, you know, because you always had some songs in there that you put in there for airplay. I remember on the album, the Broadway and Rhythms, On the Street Where You Live was almost 210, something about like 210. I got a lot of airplay on that. So that was the cut in that album. I knew the guys would play that cut out of the album because everybody likes that. So I didn't worry too much. Maybe another one could be up around 3. But we did plan. Another thing, I wonder if you or the people that might hear this might be interested in knowing. We don't have an album in here, but in the middle of this album, when you're playing an album, when the needle's out here, the revolutions of the record player in those days is always the same, 33 1/3 revolutions per minute. So when the needle is out here, it's going around this big long circumference. When it's in here, it's going a very short distance in the same period of time. The quality is much poorer here. The quality is 3 times as good out here as it is here. And we had to think about that and the timing of the album, how far apart the grooves were, and how far we would go in here. Because you get to a certain point here, the quality got so poor in there that you didn't want to use it anymore. Did you ever think about that?
I never thought of that.
We don't have that problem with CDs and numbers and digital and all that.
I mean, it relates to tape speed, too, if you tape something.
No, tape speed is determined what's going across the heads.
Yeah.
It's pulled through the heads by the rollers. And well, actually, the reel is going faster or slower, but the speed of the tape through the heads is always the same.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 15 IPS. We used to record them. Now we double it.
Did that idea of the songs that are in the middle of the record might not sound quite as good, did that determine what arrangements you might put in there?
Not so much as the first band would determine. You figure when a disc jockey got a new album or something, they used to let people go into record stores and play and listen. You figured people were going to listen to the first band and maybe skip to the second. We always thought those were the most important bands, that if they liked the first couple of bands, they'd buy the record or they'd put it on the air. So those were the ones. We didn't pay too much attention to the inner bands because we knew the quality wasn't as good anyway.
Wow, I never thought of that.
I don't know if maybe other artists never thought of those things, but I was very commercial and looked at all aspects of the business. I got into the covers and everything.
Yeah, talking about the process of recording music, I mean, you've seen from your days with Bunny Berrigan up till your most recent 100th album, which I wanted to mention, you've seen a great deal of change in the actual technology of recording. Do you think it's affected the music in the way it's written, the way that technology has changed the recording of it?
It has in this way that Well, let's see. It's hard to answer that. You know, I think overdubbing has changed things a little bit, because I remember, as long as I've been in this business, you're always learning new things. The very last album I did was this one here called I Love Movies, which is a very new album. It just reached the market. And it's movie themes, stuff like Star Wars, I have two John Williams. He's great. I love John Williams. Star Wars and Can You Read My Mind? Talk about, you know, melody and bass line.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking about a musician, you know. And all of the kind of today's movie themes. I was recording and I was going to overdub the singers on Can You Read My Mind, which had lyrics. Usually if I have lyrics. By the way, I do everything simultaneously. I'm gone back. I went through, in the beginning, I recorded everything simultaneously in the studio. And then I tried a period of time where I went to the overdubbing technique, where I'd go in and record the rhythm section, you know.
Yeah.
And then I'd bring the brass and saxes, or the brass in and record to the rhythm, and bring the saxes in, record to the brass and the rhythm, and then bring the singers in and add them on top of everything. And this, we're going to get into a technical thing now, but we're getting into something that really improves the quality of each section, in that you don't have the sound of the drums like in the first recordings that we did. I'm going back now to 56, the one you first heard. You don't have the drums. When the drum catches a punctuation by the brass, he leaks into some of the other mics, which changes the drum sound, which changes things around.
Yeah.
But leakage is not that bad. But when you do the rhythm tracks alone and you put the drummer in a booth by himself, all you hear on the drum tracks is the drum, no leakage. So in other words, you don't get drums leaking into singers like we used to have on Swonderful, Marvelous, Soulful, Nice. You don't get brass leaking into singers like we had on Swonderful. You don't get brass leaking into piano and drums leaking into piano. And you get clean tracks on everybody. But you do lose something, I think. You lose the idea of 28 people in the studio at the same time recording a piece of music and hearing what everybody else is doing and how the finished product is sounding. With the brass overdubbing technique, you do your rhythm tracks and the drummer's is hearing the guitars on earphones. The guitars aren't next to him. He's not feeling them the same. And when the brass come in to overdub to the rhythm, they're wearing earphones.
Right.
He's not really hearing the trumpets next to him as much as he did. Well, he has one ear.
Yeah.
One ear. He does hear out of here. He hears the other trumpet. But it's a whole different ball game. And one has advantages and disadvantages. The other has advantages and disadvantages. I prefer everybody live in a studio at the same time. If you need a little more singers on something that had words, overdub them.
Yeah, you can bring it
and
back.
you have a feeling of excitement and fun that is on the record that doesn't get there by the overdubbing technique. Now let's see, what got us into you asked about changes
in the recording process.
Recording with a new tech. Well, that's why I thought we should mention overdubbing, because I think that changes it a bit. It changes the writing a bit when you think you're writing for overdubbing and not for something else. You know, not for live. I think basically the answer would be no, wouldn't it? That you wouldn't change a lot because of the techniques.
I had noticed, I'm not sure I have this queued up to... this. Can you place that arrangement?
Oh, that's Billy Butterfield, Just Kidding Around. Isn't that the name?
I noticed in this particular recording, as opposed to some of the other albums, that there was just a lot more reverb.
I went overboard. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
We did two albums, Billy Butterfield and I. One was called I'll go back. we did 2 albums with Billy Butterfield. One was called Conniff Meets Butterfield, and the other was called Just Kidding Around. The first one was very successful and a real fun album, and I tried to do the same thing. You never quite can do the same thing again. And I felt, after I heard that back, I felt I went overboard with the reverb a little bit. It's exciting, but I don't know. I think if I did it over, I'd either do a little different reverb or not quite so much. I don't know which. But now I can't remember what got us into that.
Oh, I was just talking about, I guess, the sound of your recordings and the technology. And sometimes I wonder when a new device comes out, whether it's a digital reverb or whether it's synthesizers, you know, digital synthesizers, if it becomes a tool to use, and sometimes that because it's popular at that time, maybe you overuse it, and then later on you think that that's not the way to go anymore.
Yeah, it happens, like the Syn drums. Remember the Syn drums?
Yeah.
I used those for a while, and then I stopped using them because they were being used so much. I think that on the whole, things have gone forward, you know, and recording-wise. I'm using synthesizers now. I use them on this last album, a CD. I don't use them quite the same as the younger artists use them. I've tried using them with my sound, you know, that voice instrument sound that I became known for. In that I would use, like, men singers would sometimes double unisons, right, with trombones and low saxes. Girls would double unisons with trumpets and higher saxophones. And I tried, hey, I think I'll embellish that. Let's try going a little further. Let's use a synthesizer with it as well. So we did a whole album once like that. I had about 3 or 4 synthesizers. I had one synthesizer was working with, like, the girl brass, a guy who played even single line things, you know. I had 3 great keyboard guys on there. I remember I had Dick Hyman, I had, oh God, I can't think of the guys. But anyway, 3 great jazz piano, but they're all playing synthesizers. But anyway, we found that we would double one synthesizer with the girls and trumpets, one with the men and the trombones, and then another one was sustaining a pad like a string section would be. And we found that they couldn't phrase. You know, like, well, let's take one of my old things, like Smoke Gets in Your Eye. It starts with trumpets and trombones and men, and they go, and low sax, da, 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 do, da. You know, you can't get that 40 piano on the synthesizer. They go, da, 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 you know.
Right.
So what you would hear, you hear the men in the trombones go, da, and then you hear, da. They would keep going, you know. I'd say to the guy, can't you use the pedal? They couldn't do
Not
it,
that
you know.
quick.
It's too hard. It could be done if they did that for a living, you know. So we discarded that completely because I wound up in the mix down. I had to bring the synthesizer down so much that you wouldn't hear that on trombones and men or the girls and trumpet. But what we did find was the sustain pad of the string sound was really good. So we use that all the way. We use that quite a bit on I Love Movies, the new CD. And I do use that. And you know, I've heard things that are done for movies and TV shows that guys are doing out in their garages, and they are great, you know, big, big, big sounds and then good sounds. So I think things on the whole have gone forward, you know, sound-wise. And I guess in that respect, yes, it does change writing. The guys that are writing for synthesizers and doing those things in the garage, I don't know, they might not even be writing the stuff out. You know, they might have it all up here and might be sketching stuff and doing it all themselves in the garage, you know.
Because you can almost, of course they have devices now that you can play a part on a keyboard and it will be printed out in manuscript. So amazing things out there nowadays. I notice you have a fan club in Germany. And,
there's only, well, I think there's only one. That's the Ray Conniff International Fan Club,
And your records have been all around the world. I wanted to ask you as we wrap up here, let's suppose, I think one song that you didn't pick on here, let's say you were going to do an arrangement on, familiar with the song from The Lion King, Can You Feel the Love Tonight?
Mm-hmm.
Let's suppose you wanted to give that your treatment.
Mm-hmm.
How did you, when you sit down, do you sit down at a keyboard, or do you just think about it in your head? What am I going to do with this particular song? How exactly is it going to start?
By the way, I don't know if you know my background, but you might notice this is with a different label. This is my first CD with Polygram.
Yeah.
And I'm quite excited about it because it brings out an answer to your question. When we did the music for this, the fellow that asked me to come with Polygram after being with Columbia Records, which became CBS Records, which became Sony Music, I outlasted 40 years I was with the company. I outlasted 3 name changes and 2 buyouts. But anyway, this fellow that is head of Polygram International Department was with Sony Music, and he came to a concert, came backstage. Ray, why don't you come on Polygram? He says, how are things going with Sony? I said, oh, they take me for granted after 40 years. They don't promote. He says, come with me, I'll promote you. So he sent this kid out. So anyway, when we first met about what I should do, and which answers your question, I said, well, what do you think we should do for first album? And he came up with the I Love Movies idea, with a heart for the love. And he said, I'm going to send you a cassette of not 10, we're going to put 10 songs originally, it wound up 12. He said, I'll send you not 10, but I want to send you about 30 songs of movie themes, because he says, I want you to go through them. And he says, what I've noticed about when Ray Conniff does an arrangement of a song, it kind of becomes your song in a way, because it's different than it was any other time anyone else did it. He says, I want you to listen to 30 and see and pick 10 that you can make your sound on. And that's the way I did it. So I took the 30, I went through all 30, and I listened to each one quite a bit. And I will first work with the sheet music, and first I'll listen to the theme as it was done in the movie, like Star Wars theme by John Williams, or Can You Read My Mind? And then I will get the sheet music out and sit at the piano and just kind of see what comes to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll make notes up on the piano part, of ideas that came to me on that. And I went through all 30, and I make kind of pencil notes on the piano part. Or I might grab a piece of manuscript if there wasn't room to put it on the piano part, and I'll put Star Wars on the outside and scribble out a little line that I have, like on Star Wars. So what comes to me is that I started fiddling with the chords of Star Wars, and I happened to be in G, which Somewhere My Love was in. Mm-hmm. And I just come from rehearsal with the singers, and we've been rehearsing that, and I started playing boom, doom, doom, ding, doom, doom, boom, boom, doom, ding, doom, doom, which is the same as the piano background of Somewhere My Love. I said, hey, what? Hey, you know what? That would work on this. And I just took the G, D, G, B, G, D, G, D, B, C, D, 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 B, D, 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 B, A, da, 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 ba, da, ba, ba, ba,
yeah.
ba, da, ba, 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 da, da, and use the Somewhere My Love background piano pattern with Star Wars, and I did a much slower tempo, and use the trombones and and low saxes for the theme, bang, bang, da, 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 da. And so I write that idea down and go through all 30. Then I'll go back through and I will think about, I'm leaving it up to him to send me 30. He says to him it doesn't make any difference which 10 I pick. And I will think, though, about, Star Wars had a lot of publicity.
Yeah.
It had a big push. So if I can fit in with songs that have had like if now I was doing it, I certainly would put some stuff from Titanic in. You know,
Sure.
it's so big, you know,
Sure.
that people are going to see songs from Titanic in the CD, and they're going to lean towards that. So I'll lean that way a little.
Yeah.
But on the whole, I'll get the best 10 ideas, and those are the ones that'll wind up in the album.
Great. Well, I wish you a lot of success with it, and I am fascinated by your combination over the years of business sense with the great musicianship. And that's rare. I think that's rare because, you know, I've talked to a number of people who bemoan the fact that the people in power in the music world these days seem to be have no musical sense or whatever, and so it's nice to.
Well, it has
see
been quite a change. When I started, I mentioned Goddard. I mentioned Mitch Miller, who was an oboe player, and Goddard Lieberson, who was president of Columbia Records, was a graduate of Juilliard, and they were musicians, or if they weren't musicians, they were guys that wished they could have been musicians that were in. Now the record. They were musicians or guys that at least wish they could have been musicians. Now in the record companies, we're more concentrating on what's at the bottom line. How much money do we make or lose?
Right.
And they have accountants and attorneys running the companies. And I liked it better when the musicians were running the company.
Yeah.
But I owe a lot to the fellas that gave me my chance, you know, to do that. And I owe a lot to disc jockeys, too. They played the heck out of my stuff in the beginning. And fellas like you that did interviews and wrote articles on my music, too. And in the trade magazine, Downbeat, and Record World, and Variety, and those magazines, I used to, Billboard, they really gave me a lot of space. And of course, the final analysis, I owe a lot to the people that, you know, that I hit that heartstring and recorded that song they fell in love to, and they went out and bought the album. I have to thank all of them too. They've been great, and they stayed with me for years.
Well, I think probably there's a lot of song composers that are very fond of you also, because I'm sure some of them have gotten some royalties out of all the records you've sold because of the great arrangements you wrote of their music.
It's been fun because I've been able to do what I've done all the years through the band days and the big band days and playing trombone. I still play trombone when I go out on the tours. I'll play a little Jack T-gun. I'll play Basin Street Blues, or I've got a right to sing the blues or something.
Right.
And I still have great musicians in the band, and it's fun to play what I call good music, but still done in a way that the people that are out there listening and coming to the concerts can understand and enjoy as well.
Well, that sounds like a great way to wrap up. And, I want to say in camera that I'm very grateful for you for making the trip down from LA also.
Oh, okay.
You know, with the things going on in your life and you're busy, and I really appreciate you coming down and wish you all the best.